there, I'm Alexandra Harbushka. I'm founder of Life with Herpes. I'm really excited about today's podcast, today's conversation. It's going to be completely different. It's something I've never done before. I'm here with a very special guest, Kimberly from Herpes Cure Advocacy. And I'm just really excited to talk about advocacy for a cure, herpes, and where that's at. So Kimberly, I'm gonna let you take that from here.
Uh, yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be here and to connect with you too, Alex, because I've been following what you're doing and the support you offer for the community, which is so important and needed by a lot of people. Herpes Cure Advocacy is really the only patient advocacy organization working towards the cure, treatment, and prevention of herpes simplex virus types 1 and 2. We're right now kind of an early stage organization. We're
Mhm.
volunteer driven. We have a board of directors and a medical advisory board with some of the world's leading experts. And we've been doing our work for about 2.5 years now, and, are doing what we can to create, a real public health response to herpes infection, to work towards a cure, treatment, and prevention. And we believe that herpes is an infection that you know is uh, is serious, can be medically serious, and requires an adequate public health response, just like anything else.
Absolutely. And what angle are you taking with it being serious?
Well, I mean, we recognize that, most people that have the infection may never have symptoms. They can be completely asymptomatic and it may not be impacting their lives. But it's also really important to recognize that there's a lot of medical misconceptions about herpes viruses and what they can and do to the body over the long term.
Mhm.
And that there's misunderstanding in terms of how herpes actually impacts you and your health. So, for example, herpes is widely recognized as a potential contributing factor to Alzheimer's and dementia.
Mhm.
This is not something that's proven, but it's gaining um, acceptance in the medical community that there is a strong association. And it's really just something we say really requires more research urgently. um, Herpes is also recognized as contributing to other autoimmune diseases, things like fibromyalgia, lupus, potentially chronic um, CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome,
Mhm.
and a number of other things that, if you look in the medical literature and the science, there is a lot of discussion around how herpes viruses might be contributing to these areas.
Mhm.
There's other things that we know that are proven, so things like encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, meningitis is inflammation of the brain stem. So these things are rare, but they are real, scientifically proven outcomes. And, we really feel like just because the majority of people that live with herpes may not experience these outcomes doesn't mean that the potential for serious outcomes should be ignored.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the chances? Because I'll get questions all the, not all the time, but I'll get questions like, oh my gosh, is this going to go to my brain? Am I going to have, and my response is, look, we don't know what it's going to do in your body. You know what I mean? And this is data, and here's what happens the majority of the time. How would you respond to someone that's asking about, hey, am I going to have Alzheimer's because of herpes or something along that
Yeah.
line?
Yeah. And those are really, really important questions. There's a lot of people in this world that have herpes, the majority of us do,
Hmm.
right? And so it can be scary to think, oh, there are these potentially serious medical outcomes, and, should I be worried about them? And it's honestly a hard question to answer because we don't really know.
Mhm.
You know, if you look up the statistics around, you know, encephalitis or meningitis, those are rare outcomes. They're rare, you know, but how rare are they and what are your chances of getting them? You know, it's very unlikely, but it's the same kind of thing like where if someone has the flu, you know, sometimes the flu can be serious and somebody can go to the hospital for that.
Right.
Um, you know, it's similar, but then for the flu, there's been a public health response, you know, and so we have a vaccine for the flu. So the federal government has responded, you know, to that infection differently. Um, so yeah,
And
so it is rare, you know, and what your chances of getting those infection, the more serious outcomes are not likely, but still we say, you know, it's not rare enough in our advocacy. Yeah.
okay. And why do you feel like herpes hasn't gotten the attention that, say, like, you said the flu or other vaccines have received?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. There's a couple of things that we talk about, you know, why herpes has not gotten an adequate response. You know, one of the reasons is it's primarily asymptomatic, you know, so the outcomes that you can see, like oral or genital lesions, you know, most people are not even having those.
Hmm.
And then the outcomes that are what we call subclinical, so the potential outcomes to brain health or the immune issues that might arise as a result of having herpes infection and the immune system being, you know, activated in response even to the just chronic infection. Um, you know, those issues, they're happening subclinically over a longer period of time. You know, so you might have herpes for your whole life. You might be completely asymptomatic, and then you might be, you know, in your 60s or 70s, and you might be developing, you know, some kind of neurodegenerative issues. You know, you're having cognitive decline, or maybe you're having an autoimmune issue and you have no idea what's causing it. You know, so
And
there's just this disconnection there. So the asymptomatic nature of the virus is one reason.
okay.
You know, also when herpes really kind of came into the public eye more in more recent history. I don't know if you've seen, you know, the Time magazine cover with the scarlet H.
Hmm.
It's got like a red H. It's very, you know, kind of well recognized
Hmm.
symbol of herpes stigma. You know, pretty soon after that magazine was published and when herpes was being talked about, you know, in the early 80s, the HIV and AIDS epidemic broke, you know.
Right. So that took the
And
cake.
yeah, and people stopped talking about herpes, you know, because it's not killing you, you know, and it felt like, you know, compared to HIV, it's relatively benign.
Right.
Um, So I think between those two things, you know, and then the stigma, you know, would really be the third thing that really caused people to stop talking about it publicly, patients to stop asking for better treatment or
Mhm.
cures, for medical professionals, you know, healthcare providers, people did not want to be associated with it. So it's really for so long, you know, been under the rug and been under the radar. And a lot of people, and you know, I'm sure that you've talked to people are living in the closet. Unfortunately, it's really sad, you know, that people feel that they have to do that. But a lot of people do not talk about it with their community, their family, their friends, you know, and they're not out there asking for change.
Right.
So
Right. I mean, a stigma in general holds people things back, but specifically when it comes to herpes, it's one of the largest stigmas out there. And it's extremely unfortunate because, to add to what you're saying, if this didn't have such the large stigma, then we would have been able to make progress much
absolutely.
much sooner than potentially now. And I would argue that it really wasn't until 2020 when taboo topics, stigma topics, those things kind of were okay to talk about, especially on social media. And that's kind of brought a lot of other taboo topics forward, not just herpes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you know, this the stigma is a real thing. It's hard for a lot of people to navigate and um there are a lot of resources for people to learn how to feel good about themselves and to like feel even empowered, living with this infection.
Mhm.
Um, but I think unfortunately, the medical community, really still kind of minimizes the medical importance of herpes. And so when people are diagnosed, they're told, hey, it's no big deal. And this is probably not going to impact you. And you can take your antiviral therapy and you'll be fine. And they're not told about the clinical trials that are happening. And they're not told about the new, scientific research that's happening. So it's treated very differently than other infections or other, health issues that people are dealing with that, patients are out there asking and advocating for change. That hasn't, up until we were, came into existence, it hasn't really been happening where patients didn't have a vehicle to ask for change.
Mhm. You're right. So when you talk about advocacy or you talk about a cure, what does a cure look like to you? Because I get questions all the time and I say, we need to put an asterisk there because people say, oh, we want a cure or we want a vaccine. And I said, those are not words to be used as synonyms. Those are completely different words, right? A
Yep.
vaccine can prevent potentially transmission. Are you saying you want a vaccine that cures you? Well, I don't think that is what we're talking about. So can you maybe elaborate on that? Because again, I think people get mixed up they use that, interchangeably.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I will just caveat, my response with, I'm a patient advocate, I'm the founder of Herpes Cure Advocacy, and I've learned a lot about the science, but I'm not a medical professional. But it is important to know, the difference between a vaccine, a cure, a prophylactic vaccine. They are all different.
Mhm.
So the in my mind, a cure is something that would eradicate the virus from the body completely.
Okay.
Which is something that is possible. There's work being done at the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center with Keith Jerome and his team, where they're working on, a gene editing approach to curing the virus, which is something that a lot of patient advocates are really excited about. And, there's some patient advocates that have actually raised a lot of money for that project.
Mhm.
Um, there's also a vaccine, which would be something that just, activates the immune response in a way that the virus, doesn't impact you at all. It's not transmissible. You get no outbreaks. So, that would be something like potentially the GlaxoSmithKline vaccine that's in clinical trials right now. So, there's a potential for a therapy like that would still, the virus would be in your body, but you would have just your immune system would be activated so much that, the virus does not impact you in any way. And then there are prophylactic vaccines for people who are not yet infected with the virus, but they would be protected from getting it, which is an awesome thing, even for people that do have herpes already. Just being able to know that you could tell your new potential partners there is a vaccine out there that could protect you completely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so the prophylactic vaccine is to prevent transmission to a partner. The other
Yeah.
vaccine you were talking about is for people that already have herpes.
Yeah, a vaccine that would activate your immune system so that it wouldn't impact you. That is something that would be for people who already have herpes. Yeah.
And is that HSV1 and or I guess, are all these HSV1, HSV2, or are they specific to one type?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there, what's in the clinical pipeline right now, they're all different in terms of which type of the virus they're targeting. We have resources on our website and there's a document that we have created that's very popular that we feel like has provided a lot of value for the community. It's called the Herpes Cure Pipeline. And we're on the third version of it. So we call it, the Herpes Cure Pipeline 3.0. So that's on our website for people. And it's really the world's only record of what's in clinical trials right now and what's happening in preclinical research, that they have intent to enter clinical trials. So there's a lot of preclinical research happening with people who are working on a vaccine, a cure, a new therapy of some kind, that is preclinical, meaning it's not yet being done in humans.
Mhm.
And then, the clinical trials, it's the work that they're working with the FDA, with FDA supervision, and, they're researching their new therapy, whatever it might be, in humans.
Okay, so I just got excited with all these things here. Okay, so there's preclinical, then there's clinical. You said so preclinical is not on humans. Clinical is with humans on with the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say a time frame is for all of these?
That's what patients want to know, right?
Right.
Everybody's asking, well, how quickly and how can we speed this up? Because, patients really people living with herpes really want better treatments, and unfortunately there have not been, any medical improvements or innovation in therapy for herpes, or the treatments that are available for herpes in like nearly 4 decades, which is just not okay. So, of all of the work that is being done, there are therapies that people are talking about that could come to market if they are successful in clinical trials within like 2 to 3 years.
Mhm.
But that is, probably the soonest possible. And yet the preclinical research would take much longer. That's research that hasn't even begun clinical trials. So, people are hopeful, that change is coming. There's a lot of good momentum and investment in this area from big pharma and, even like mid-sized, small, biotech and pharmaceutical companies are investing in this clinical research area. I will have to say, like, the advocacy work and the federal and like government response, some of the things that have happened as a result of our advocacy work, I think are helping. Uh, Pharma and biotech companies, they're paying attention to those things, what the federal government is doing, what NIH, what the CDC, what they're all doing, as like leading market indicators to see, like, is there a market for this? What's happening? And I'm really grateful, that with some of the work that we're doing and the momentum from the patients, in the community and professionals in the community that we've been able to connect with, that there is a lot of momentum for change right now.
What's holding up? Is there anybody or anything holding up the research?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad and complex thing to
Yeah.
change the world, right? And to change,
Mhm.
medicine and public health and what is happening, in the world when it comes to this infection. So, change takes time, but we're doing our best to get there. And, what is holding things up? I mean, I think patients that are afraid to speak out,
Interesting.
patients that are afraid to ask their doctor for better therapy or ask their elected representatives for change. That's, something that we need. Also, the federal government and public health leaders and stakeholders. So people at NIH, NIAID, NINDS, people at the CDC, people in the Department of Health and Human Services or at the White House who really are responsible, for activating a real public health response to this infection. Those people, I don't want to say they're holding us back because they're our partners and they've been, really good partners on the path to change, and there has been good progress, but really we need more and we need to act more quickly. You know,
Yeah, would you say that, because it's always been like the scuttlebutt is that it's the big pharma that doesn't want a vaccine. Would you say that's
Mhm.
accurate, or is the big pharma like, are they trying to push for one?
I'm not really a believer of that, kind of conspiracy theory. I know people have talked about that. We've heard that in the community. Oh, big pharma does not want a herpes cure, or they don't want any better treatment because they're already making enough money on what's out there.
Hmm.
And I have never believed that. I think that big pharma will react when they see an opportunity.
Hmm.
And I think that there just has been no momentum. It has been so dead in terms of um, establishing demand, and establishing that there is an unmet need. And I think that executives, people working in big pharma, and any pharma or biotech company, they want to be successful. They want to make money, and when they see a market for something, I think that they will act accordingly.
They'll
So
adapt. Yeah.
yeah, I think that unfortunately stigma is really pervasive, and I think it has impacted even, the executives at the pharma companies, that they might not want to be the one at the cocktail party telling their friends, "Hey, I'm working on a herpes vaccine at work,"
Interesting. Even at that level, because you would think it's just something you're working on. It's not, you're not saying that you have it.
I I think that stigma is really pervasive enough so that it impacts some decisions at,
Oh.
pharma companies and biotech. Another group that I would say, is potentially holding us back and could help make progress is the press. Journalists, science writers, people out there that write about infection, sexual health, brain health, anybody that's out there talking about health, in the press, really has a responsibility to help share with the world. This is really common infection with potential for serious health outcomes, and people should know. And it's really been so much under the radar for so long, and so we have found, that stigma is pervasive, even so much with the press, that people that talk about sexual health or HIV AIDS, people don't want to talk about herpes.
Oh, wild. I have my own thoughts on it because with the herpes stigma, and I think it parallels to what you're saying is, in the 90s, well, late 80s, but really in the 90s when kind of the marketing came out for HIV, right? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we knew about HIV in the 80s, but it was really in the 90s is when it started to be marketed, is because we knew that at that point, at that time, HIV killed you. There was no way out. There was no other option, right? And once it crossed over to the heterosexual world, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just them, they
Mm-hmm.
over there
Mm-hmm.
that have this. It's not going to impact us. And it was a global issue. And you also got Princess Diana involved with it, who was huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
the marketing that was put out was very much let's heal the world. Let's do this together. Let's have
Mm-hmm.
marches, let's have fundraisers, we'll have AIDS Day, all of these things, right? It was no longer just the LGBTQ community.
Right.
And so the marketing that was put out made it
Yeah.
welcoming,
Yeah.
welcoming.
100%. Yep.
I want to make the same argument about HPV, right? HPV has been around as long as we've been around, right? It's just part of it. It's a virus that lives with us. And all of a sudden, it was in like 1999, 2000, 2001, early 2000s was when it was actually marketed as an STD.
Mm-hmm.
Before then, it wasn't discussed. It was, oh, you got to get
Mm-hmm.
your PAP. Nobody,
Mm-hmm.
women didn't really know why they were getting PAPs. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was marketed as, oh, well, this can actually cause cancer. And oh, by the way, we have a vaccine. And so therefore we have a solution for you and we don't want you to get cancer. And so here's a vaccine, right? So
Mm-hmm.
my perception of this and as someone that can remember this growing up, and hearing nothing of HPV in the 90s, it didn't exist, to all of a sudden in the 2000s, it was something that
Yeah.
like just popped up. Um, and herpes was, it was the whatever you want to say. I don't, I'm trying to think of like an analogy. It was the your skeleton in the closet.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
because it didn't it didn't have it didn't kill you. It doesn't kill you, right?
Mm-hmm.
There has been no cure, quote unquote, cure for it. And just like you said,
Yep.
the advocacy is fairly new, and this
Mm-hmm.
research is something that we're bringing awareness to. So I think had herpes had a completely different start point,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If it had set sail at a different point in time, I think it would be a completely different narrative.
Yeah, I mean, those are great observations, and yeah, I mean, all of those things have impact. I mean, the timing, of when the HIV AIDS epidemic broke and, I mean, it all is part of the story of why we are, where we are today. And, I mean, people that don't have HIV and AIDS started going to HIV and AIDS walks or started donating money or started asking for change and supporting, the global fight against the HIV and AIDS epidemic, when they felt like it was something that was in their community and could impact their friends and family, could impact them,
Mhm.
and so I think having um Princess Diana, or Elizabeth Taylor or Magic Johnson,
Mhm.
all of these kind of first advocates that came out early and said, we need change now. I think that it's so important to have those like people leading the charge and saying like this is an important issue, and until that starts to happen for herpes, you know, it is going to be hard because people don't want to be the only one, standing up for change. They don't, it's harder to ask for change when you're standing up and doing it alone. You don't want to go, if there's a rally or a walk, can you imagine like a rally for the cure, treatment, and prevention of herpes? Like that would be amazing, but I think people are because of the stigma, I think that people are, really intimidated by something like that. And they
They
don't
don't
want to
want to
be
be
the only ones.
they don't want to be seen at the walk.
Yeah, they don't want to be seen at the walk. Yeah. And so until there are people like Princess Diana, Magic Johnson, those people that are really like out there leading the charge, saying it's an important issue, it is harder to ask for change when you're doing it alone. So we're really hoping, that patients can start to feel empowered to ask for change and to use their voice for change and to know that they have a choice, that they don't just have to live with herpes forever, that they can change is possible, just like anything else, and to kind of combat and fight the stigma, and you don't have to be an advocate for the cure, treatment, and prevention of herpes. You don't have to tell your friends and family necessarily. So that's also something we want, patients to know.
Right. That's a great thing to know because that was going to be my next kind of segue is I'm sure listeners right now are going, okay, what can I do? What are my
Yeah.
next steps? And is it dollars? Is it time? It
Mm-hmm.
awareness? What
Mm-hmm.
would be the next step for somebody listening that's like, okay, I'm behind this. I have herpes. I don't want my next generation, the legacy to continue, or I don't want my next potential lover or partnership or whatever to have this. Or I am sick and tired of these outbreaks. I need it to stop. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of fall into three categories here. What would be the next step?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I think for me and for a lot of other patient advocates that I've talked to, you know, being an advocate for change can also be very healing, for people that are kind of dealing with their diagnosis. So, um, it can be really empowering to know that change is possible and to be able to use your voice for change. So, if you are an advocate and you are listening and you want to help create change, we have on our website a new advocate starters guide. It's like a step-by-step guide you can go through, and it gives you very basic practical steps to, create change.
Wow.
It can be very easy. There's very simple tasks that we share on a regular basis for people who are like in our network and are receiving our emails or following us on the internet, on Twitter and what have you. We put out regular action alerts, we call them. And, it might be as simple as emailing this particular person at the National Institute of Health and asking them, hey, what are you doing about herpes? And why is the funding level for herpes research like this? And this is an important public health issue. So sometimes just sending an email is part of what we do, and it can be really impactful. We also ask people, to contact their elected representatives. It sounds really, really trite and, so simple, but it's really true that when you ask your elected representatives for change, that has impact, and I think it has been such a long time. I don't know if there has ever been a coordinated effort to ask the federal government for a public health response, so that's, part of our work. We also have a patient advocate task force for people who have, been advocating for a little bit. They have some great ideas. They have a lot of energy. They want to volunteer and put some time in, so we have regular meetings people can join. We're in the midst of putting together a professional discussion group for people who, if you're a scientist in the field, if you're a researcher, if you're a healthcare provider, those are people who we need as advocates as well, to be bringing this issue to the conferences, to be bringing this issue to, the executive boards of these different organizations, and the council and advisory meetings to say, hey, I'm a professional in this field, and, herpes is something that deserves an adequate public health response. So, those are a couple different ways people can get involved. And I will also say again, you can do as much or as little as you want. You can send an email completely anonymously. If you send an email to the CDC or the National Institute of Health or ASHA or any of these stakeholders that we're advocating towards and asking for help and leadership, you don't have to tell your friends and family. You're not coming out into the world and telling everyone I have herpes just because you sent an email, So there's
Right.
lots of ways to advocate that you can still, feel comfortable with your status, being as publicly present or not, if you're not comfortable with that.
So I'll have all this linked for everybody in the show notes of kind of to get your, I guess, starter kit. I don't, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to call it. Of, step one, here's what you want to do. If you want to be an advocate, here's what you can do. So I think that that's going to be fabulous. I definitely know that I have people who would love this.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm so happy to be able to share our message with your audience. And, we want to like empower people to know, that change is possible. It's not like there's no reason why herpes cannot be cured or treated with more effective treatment. There's no reason why not, and I think it's really up to us to recognize that, to start using our voices for change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many people that I think I mean, they're starting to become a wave. Like, I can see it on social media. There's a lot of people that will say like, hey, this isn't a big deal.
Right.
Why are you being such like, like, I don't see that, meaning I don't see the comments that are saying, oh, you're disgusting. Ew, you have herpes. I
Mm-hmm.
see more people saying, hey, this isn't going to prevent you
Yep.
from getting married. This isn't going to prevent you from having children. This isn't going to prevent you from the dream of that that we dream of as children, right? This isn't going to prevent you for this. So I am seeing that sort of change.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talk about, is herpes going to ruin your life? No. There's a lot, that people deal with when they're first diagnosed that can be really hard. And then, most people learn to live with it, and, they manage and they figure it out, but we say that, uh, you know, herpes is something that you don't need to be ashamed of. Herpes is something that you can feel beautiful, you can feel sexy, you can feel worthy. Like, you're a beautiful person and the world needs you here, and you can still do everything you've ever wanted in your life.
Mhm.
And that's all true. And we need to like crush the stigma, because it is really difficult for a lot of people. The stigma can be really crushing, and that is something like we need to combat against that. And at the same time, we also say herpes is potentially medically serious, and it can be potentially more medically serious than we know. We need more scientific research. We need to know for sure, like, what exactly is herpes doing to the body? There's a lot of unanswered questions, and there are some rare outcomes that are proven that are not okay, and there is not enough being done, even about the stuff that we do know. So we say, like, there's kind of a balance between saying, you know, you can live with herpes and you will be okay, right? But then also at the same time, we deserve a cure. We deserve better treatment. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be advocating for that. You can have both things. It's not binary.
Yeah, I think that's fabulous. I think that's fabulous.
Thank you.
Well, Kimberly, is there any last tidbit that we did not cover that you feel should be covered, or any last, website or just anything, basically anything else you want to say?
Yeah. Well, our website is herpescureadvocacy.com, so you can find all of the things on there. We're on all the different platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Reddit. And I will just kind of share a call to action for people, if you're living with herpes and you want to create change, you can do this very easily in your spare time. Take 5 minutes a week. It's not hard to do. And just that we see you, and we recognize that people do want change, and we are 100% here for that. And we want to really empower people to use your voice for change. And we're here, if you want to learn more, if you want to get involved, we love ideas, and we'd love to hear from you.
I love it.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Kimberly. And for those of you listening, you'll find the resources in the show notes or linked wherever you're watching this, and you will know where to go for your next steps to become an advocate as well. Thanks so much for listening, guys. And thank you, Kimberly, for coming on and sharing this wealth of information that's going to be transforming for so many. I know we all really appreciate that. And thank you so much.
Thank you.